The morning of Wednesday, July 18th, 2007, was seemingly uneventful for the construction crew working on the culvert on the road leading to the Bear Creek overpass in Victor, Montana. Other than the record high temps for the day for Ravalli County, there really wasn't much to write home about, you might say. That is until a man, 58 at the time, by the name of Jim Ramaker, approached their work site and inquired as whether or not they had by chance seen his missing hiking partner for the day. A 5-foot tall, 115-pound woman with brown hair and brown eyes, 55 at the time, Barbara Bolick, who was last seen wearing glasses, tan shorts, a pastel-colored shirt, ankle-high hiking boots, and carrying a black day pack. Jim had apparently lost sight of her. Whether they were aware of it or not at the time, that road crew, their recollections, their observations, however sparse and fleeting from that day, would inevitably become key factors in an extensive, time-consuming, and costly investigation, and inextricably intertwined in the lore surrounding one of the most mysterious and perplexing missing persons cases in all the history of unsolved missing persons cases. Allow me to reintroduce myself and the channel. My name is Tober, and you're watching The Domain. And this is Barbara Bolick, The Vanishing of. Don't fade. What? I didn't know what a culvert was. Culvert? If you're a fan of true crime, and if you're a fan of our content, but most importantly, if you want to help get the word out about cold cases like the one that we're about to cover today on Barbara Bolick, hit the like, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button, and activate the bell notification immediately. The remarkable story of Barbara Bolick and the odd circumstances surrounding her disappearance is definitely one for the ages. Ultimately, it revolves around 4 main individuals. Jim and of course Barbara, both of whom we've already mentioned, but also Barbara's husband Carl Bolick, who was 66 at the time, and a woman by the name of Donna Biles, 56, who was Jim's girlfriend at the time and is also Carl's cousin. But before we get into all of that, let's get a sort of lay of the land, so to speak, and flush out this region of southwestern Montana so that you have a feel for what we're dealing with here. The Bitterroot Valley is 96 miles north to south and stretches narrow from the Lost Trail Pass in Idaho, expanding wider and flatter as it finally reaches the city of Missoula in Montana, the county of which borders the western edge of the state. The valley itself is bisected by the Bitterroot River and flanked by the Bitterroot Range, with its large wilderness region to the west and the Sapphire Mountains to the east, with peaks varying from 2,200 feet to about 10,200 feet. The Bitterroot National Forest is comprised of nearly 1.6 million acres, with 44 hiking trails, running trails, and viewing trails cutting through the dense forestry. It's a beautiful and scenic area that provides challenges for beginners as well as experts, rewarding hikers and runners with glorious vistas beneath the beautiful blue skies. In the middle of July in 2007, on a hot summer day, Barbara Bolick vanished without a trace from the Bear Creek Overlook trail, which was her favorite trail. James H. Ramaker, aka Jim, would go on to tell authorities that she had quietly disappeared when he looked away briefly. Not a trace of Barbara or any indication of what became of her would ever be found. But how and why did Barbara suddenly vanish from a trail that she had hiked countless times, both on her own and with others? One that was comprised of loose shale rock, no less, making a soundless exit of any kind extremely difficult, if not almost impossible. What happened to Barbara Bolick? Some background. Barbara, at the time of her disappearance, had been married for about 14 years. Maiden name Perry, married once Smezik, Barbara met Carl Bolick, the man who would become her husband, in New Jersey while he was still in the Air Force. Carl went on to work for the next 17 years as the Assistant Director of Worldwide Security Operations at J.P. Morgan Chase Bank in New York City. After they retired, the married couple moved to Corvallis, Montana in 2001. Carl was a Montana native. His wife had never lived there. However, Barbara, an avid hiker, soon grew to love her new home and would frequently go on hikes in the nearby Bitterroot Valley. "This is the place I want to be," she told her husband. The cautious Barbara always brought along a backpack that contained food, water, and a .357 Magnum revolver for protection. Montana is home to a variety of wild animals, including bears, mountain lions, rattlesnakes, and moose. Various articles about Barbara, presumably from interviews with Carl, make it a point to mention that Barbara's fear of heights made her actively avoid any cliffs that she may have encountered in getting too close to when she was on these walks. But these same articles also go on to mention that at the same time, Barbara had been taking pilot lessons and was eager to get her license. Additionally, she was learning how to ski. Beyond that, Carl insists that his wife was very happy with their life together and had no real complaints. In July, shortly before Barbara's disappearance, Donna Biles and Jim Raymaker fly in from California to visit Barbara and Carl in Montana. Barbara always enjoyed taking guests with her on hikes to show them the scenery, especially considering the fact that Carl could no longer partake in these walks with Barbara after suffering a heart attack. The plan for July 18th was for Donna, Barbara, and Jim to hike Barbara's favorite trail, the Bear Creek Overlook in Victor, Montana, which was about 45 minutes away from the Bolick home in Corvallis. But when Donna woke up that morning, she found that she was hungover from the drinks they'd had the night before and decided that it wouldn't be a good idea for her to go hiking after all. However, Barbara and Jim still wanted to go. So at around 8:30 or 9 a.m., Barbara woke Carl up and told him that she was going to take Jim to the Overlook and that they'd be back later. Carl assured her that he'd take care of making dinner. And with that, Barbara and Jim left. Aside from Jim, it would be the last time anyone saw Barbara, at least officially on record. As Carl spent the morning working on a carpentry project, Jim and Barbara embark on their hike. From the hour of 9-ish to about 11:30, they set on their ascension up the trail leading to the Bear Creek Overlook. According to alltrails.com, the full span at length is a 4.5-mile barren back hike of moderate difficulty with a 1,154-foot gain in elevation. The amount of time required on average to hike this trail is about 2.5 hours and thus 75 minutes in either direction. According to Jim Ramaker, he and Barbara hiked the entire full length of the Bear Creek Overlook and then stopped to have a bite to eat. They came across other hikers, 2 young men, around this time, and the group talked for roughly half an hour while admiring the scenery together. It is unknown exactly when the men left or how far ahead of Jim and Barbara they might have been, but Jim stated that he and Barbara started to head back around 11:30 a.m. Although it is not confirmed, it is probably within this 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. time frame, but after Jim and Barbara had gotten there, that the construction crew working on the road immediately prior to the Bear Creek Overlook trail arrived. At some point, Jim stopped to look around. And he says he did this for no longer than maybe 45 seconds before turning back and finding that Barbara, who had been 20 to 30 feet ahead of him, was no longer there. Jim had initially placed her disappearance at anywhere between 11:30 a.m. and 1 p.m., which is a fairly big window of time, but feels strongly that she went missing closer to 11:35 a.m. I turned to look at a distant peak off to the west for about a minute with my back to her. When I turned back to continue heading down, Barb was nowhere to be seen. His next course of action, Jim explained, was to search the immediate area for Barbara while calling out to her. However, he received no response and found no sign of either Barbara or her backpack. According to him, it was as if she just simply vanished into thin air. Back at the Bolick household, when noon rolled around, Donna was starting to feel anxious about the fact that Barbara and Jim hadn't returned yet. Carl, on the other hand, knew that his wife was an experienced hiker and extremely familiar with the trail that they were planning to walk that day. So he reassured his cousin that there was absolutely nothing to worry about and that they'd likely be back any minute. As Jim made his way back to the trailhead, roughly around 1 p.m., he found construction workers there. The road leading to the trailhead was closed for maintenance that day. Again, it's unclear exactly when the workers arrived, but when Jim came across them, he asked if they had seen Barbara and gave a short description of her. They hadn't seen her, but did remember seeing 2 young men with a black and white dog exit the trail earlier. At that point, a slightly more panic-stricken Jim makes his way back up the mountain and, with a heightened sense of urgency, scours the trail all the way to the overlook and back, looking for Barbara, calling out her name, and even frantically blowing on his safety whistle in hopes that she'd turn up somewhere along the path. Sometime between 2 and 2:30 p.m., Jim returns to the construction site at the trailhead, empty-handed, still without Barbara, and asks the workers there to assist him in contacting the authorities. Concomitantly, back at home, as Donna began to worry further, she suggested that Carl call somebody. He was about to do just that when the phone rang during the hour of 2 p.m. He remembered picking up the phone and hearing an unfamiliar voice on the other end. It was a Forest Service law enforcement officer. She asked me if my wife's name was Barbara, and I instantly thought something terrible had happened. To his distress, he had learned that Jim had reported Barbara missing to a U.S. Forest supervisor at 2:30 p.m. Carl immediately drove to the site, hoping that his wife would have been located by the time that he had got there. But he was devastated to find that this wasn't the case, and the search for Barbara had begun in earnest. Barbara's fitness, she ran every day, and the fact that she carried a revolver with her fueled Carl's disbelief when the Forest Service called to say that she was missing. You know what I said? I said BS. I thought that if anybody was lost, it would have been her hiking companion. Carl remained at the Bear Creek Overlook until midnight, desperate to find Barbara. He was encouraged to go home and rest, which he finally did, but the following day he came back with a group of friends and neighbors who wanted to help him look for her. In the coming days, several ground search and rescue teams, accompanied by search dogs, were organized to search for Barbara. Aircraft using infrared and thermal imaging were utilized as well. Strangely, nothing whatsoever was found. Not only was Barbara missing, but they couldn't find any evidence that Barbara was even at the trail that day. The dogs were unable to pick up her scent anywhere. There was no Barbara, Carl says. They couldn't find hide nor hair of her. After 2 weeks of intensive searching and investigation, Ravalli County Sheriff Chris Hoffman said Barbara Bolick's disappearance was a mystery. "We are perplexed," Hoffman told the Bitterroot Star. "We have combed the area in the vicinity of the disappearance very well. No trace at all has been found. We'd like to verify, if we even can, that Bolick was even on the mountain that day." Jim told police about the two men that they encountered on the trail that day, and law enforcement attempted to locate them, unsure if these men were locals or vacationers. To this day, they've never been found or identified. While it might appear quite odd or possibly even suspicious that they never came forward, it's also important to note that Barbara's case never received a great deal of media attention, so it's possible that they were and still are unaware that she is missing, especially if they didn't live in the area. Carl Bolick was devastated by the mysterious disappearance of Barbara. He found it difficult to eat or sleep for weeks and ended up losing 35 pounds over the course of that summer. Years later, he described his thoughts. "I just couldn't accept it. I just knew she was going to show up one way or another, but it didn't happen. It still hasn't happened. I don't have the answers. I wish I did. There's just nothing." And that's what's so perplexing. The loss of his wife also made him overthink his actions during their marriage, wondering if he had taken her for granted. Lamenting, "You say, oh my God, why did I do that? Why wasn't I more attentive?" While Jim Ramaker remained cooperative with law enforcement, he and Donna soon drifted away from Carl. Sadly, Carl Bolick passed away in 2021 at the age of 8. Lead investigator Perry Johnson later reflected on the strangeness of Barbara's disappearance. "This whole case challenges our life experience. Whenever we go hiking, we expect that we'll return to our vehicle. We think nothing about it. That's just the way it is." To this day, not a shred of evidence has ever been discovered with regard to Barbara Bolick's disappearance. The truth about what happened to her, the woman who seemingly vanished without a trace on that long ago July day, remains a mystery. Even years and years later, there are more questions than answers, says Hoffman. In a close-knit place like the Bitterroot Valley, such an event unsettles everyone, even the investigators. I would say that the law enforcement who worked closest with Carl during that time grieved with Carl and the rest of his family. Hoffman, a 30-year law enforcement veteran, says the strange circumstances surrounding Barbara's disappearance makes the case unforgettable. It's something that I don't think we go even a week without thinking about, he says. "We don't like mysteries. We like cold facts, and we want to get to the bottom of it." The county hasn't ruled out any scenarios. The Selway Bitterroot Wilderness spans over 2,000 square miles. If you don't feel about that big in that county, Hoffman says, pinching his fingers together, then you're not seeing it for what it is. That morning, Barbara left with only the clothes she wore. Her new passport, her driver's license, and $55 in cash remained at her home in Corvallis. Carl theorized that an animal could have taken her, but searchers found no signs of predators. He wondered if someone could have abducted her, but law enforcement nixed that idea, Carl says. I went on the theory for a while that maybe she could have been kidnapped by some backcountry recluse. The authorities briefly looked at Carl as a person of interest. At one point, a Ravalli County investigator says, "Well, you know darn well what happened," Carl recalls. "It kinda ticked me off. All I know is that she went hiking that Wednesday morning, and she didn't come back." Carl also regrets that Raymaker wasn't polygraphed before leaving the area. "I think they could have done more with him early on," Carl says. After 3 weeks of regular check-ins, Biles distanced herself from the family after suggesting that Barbara could have taken her own life. Carl ended their contact. As for Raymaker, he maintains his innocence. "I've never laid a hand on Barbara," he says. "Never harmed her in any way." He empathizes with the family and says that the cloud of suspicion has followed him since 2007. So what happened to Barbara Bolick? As you probably have guessed, the speculation on the internet is fairly rampant in terms of theories in that regard. And yet in this video, we have none of that. And you aren't going to see any of that. That's because we plan on actually doing a live dedicated to just the theories on Barbara Bolick, to be announced, but probably around the end of August. In the meantime, we would like you to comment below and tell us what your theory is on what happened with the information we provided so far. We will be delving into some speculation and rumor responsibly. Because of that, we are trying to reach out to some of the people that are close to the events surrounding her disappearance. Whether or not they're going to be receptive or not is anybody's guess. Probably not. It's our view that nearing 2 decades since her disappearance, there's kind of diminishing returns on keeping things so tight-lipped. And maybe there isn't that much more information. Who knows? But at any rate, that's our plan. And we hope to see you in August.